Anyway, maintenance of vehicles. You're down. You had 2 services a year, you could blow that 250. There's no way near that's even in the ballpark, Jeremy. And if you own a vehicle, I'm sure you take it in. Both those vehicles are donated vehicles. The Elks had a lot to do with the last one. I was heavily involved with the van when we got that for the city. National Van Sales down the street where you said you brought it, they were involved in it, and I'm sure they've been real good to you as far as any repairs. I know you're relatively new in the job, but I don't know how you can get $250. You might as well have a zero there because you can't bring a car in and have it repaired today of any source for that kind of money. So I know we can't add, but I would be if you get repairs, don't hesitate doing them. Come back down to the council because I think we'll listen. So I'm just my point.
We can put that in the budget message as well.
You know, it should be. I mean, it's grossly underfunded, grossly underfunded.
And Jeremy?
Yeah, I just wanted to reassert, Councilor Blair, that I take responsibility for cutting that too far. We shouldn't have gone that far. I recognize that. So we'll make sure that the vehicles are maintained through source budget or citywide stuff. Yeah. So
we transport some precious people around in those, and I wouldn't want the veterans agent, you know, pulling his head in saying we can't repair something because there's not enough money in the budget to properly maintain. So as I said, if you run across a problem and you got a problem with a vehicle, please, Jeremy, I think you put yourself on the line there saying you take care of it, but let's get it done. Maintenance is very important thing.
Agreed.
You know?
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Jeremy. Todd?
Thank you. I just want to commend Ben for coming in a pandemic year. That had to be a very difficult time to begin. And with Veterans Day and Memorial Day, I think we did as good as we possibly could. And you got a parade you still never been to here. So that'll be a big thing in the next year.
Good, thank you. Yes, well, it's actually been quite doable because of the type of volunteerism we have in the Attleboro community. I can tell you, I came over from Hanover, and Hanover's got a lot of nice folks, but they don't step up like the Attleboro folks do. When it came to gray flags and field of flags, I mean, it's just a bunch of people raising their hand. What can I do for you? So it was really not really much me. I helped coordinate some things, but everything from the veterans organizations to AACS to folks inside City Hall, I just get the support for everything I need. And it's always doable.
Well, you flow with it well.
Thank you.
All right. Ben, thank you so much for coming down, and we're looking forward to working with you.
Thank you very much, Council. Thank you very much for everybody having me on.
All right. Have a good night.
You as well. Good night.
All right, and I see Superintendent Hayes is on. We'll bring on Tom, and we'll get going to wastewater.
What page is that, Jay?
It's in its own book, I believe.
Yeah. Better go get it.
Councilor Blair, originally it was in one of the pockets inside the binder. I believe.
Oh, yeah, there you go. Yeah, you're right.
Tom, good evening.
Good evening.
So thanks for joining us tonight. And the way this is going to go, the way we've been doing this, same as the last couple of years, give you the opportunity to talk to us about your budget, anything you think the council should know. And from there, we will open it up to questions. So the floor is yours, sir.
The fiscal 22 budget, probably the only real major change we're going to see in staffing is the two electricians that used to be a 60-40% split with the water department. They are coming to work at wastewater full time, so I'll be picking up the additional 40% on 2 employees. And that's probably, our biggest change in that line item. Other than that, we've tried to stay as level funded as last year. I mean, we can't account for inflation. Things go up. We have to raise the line items occasionally, but we've tried to compensate by reducing some other lines along the way if possible.
When we look at purchases of services, 521010, heating is 27,000 less than fiscal 21. Do you think that that's going to be funded rather?
All the information I have is that there's going to be a little over 9% decrease in the cost of the per therm of heating. So we were looking good for fiscal 21 with the 30,000. So basically, I reduced the line for this year because of that decrease in the cost per therm, which is supposed to start July 1st, I believe, is the date.
Okay. Deb, I'm still looking over a couple things. Anything you want to add, Deb?
You're muted, Deb.
She was saying some great stuff.
I know. You're muted.
I was,
There you go.
there's lots of people who would just like to figure out how I could just be muted, Peter. So sorry. Thank you. Just for clarification for the council, the electrician, the 40% that Tom is picking up that is out of the water department budget, there was an analysis done during fiscal 21. I get confused of what fiscal year I'm in. During fiscal 21 about how much time was actually being used by the water department of the electricians. And the result was that this was more than reasonable. We will continue to look at other elements of shared costs to see, do they make sense going forward in the future? This one, the blended rate of what we would charge the water department. So you're going to see that expense on the water side, but the $65 an hour that we would charge would just be coming back to Tom in the wastewater budget as a revenue source. The individuals are fully funded, including health insurance now in the wastewater side of the budget. The only other salary related thing that I'd like to point out is what we discussed the other night when we were talking to the Department of Public Works relative to snow. The logistics of working out how the journal entries will be done and the documentation that will be required, but individuals that work full-time for the wastewater department, if they are assigned to plow snow on general streets throughout the city, that cost will be charged to the snow budget. Presently, the overtime costs are already charged to the snow budget for regular street plowing, but the straight time is not. So that will be addressed. That's probably a fall thing that we'll work out the actual details with the departments. All of the other costs in the salary and wage grouping are typical costs that you see. The health insurance, the Medicare. I do question, I think that's a little bit light once the collective bargaining agreement settle. When negotiations are tapped, there will probably be a need for some money to go into the Medicare line and the retirement numbers provided by the retirement board. Health insurance, there was no rate increase. You will recall for active employees, the rate and the numbers reflect open enrollment with a modest increase for the mid-year expectation for the senior plans. So other than things that Tom might want to speak to, in one other thing, there's a reclassification in the department. Historically, fuel charges have been all directed at the gasoline line. There is a diesel use within the department. So you'll see that the diesel line has funding and the gasoline line has less funding. That the numbers in the aggregate are about right, we think. And those will just be properly accounted on a go-forward basis, diesel being charged directly to the diesel line. There's some modest adjustments between the ask and the request and recommendation in a couple of lines. I don't know if you wanted to speak to those. That would be equipment maintenance and supplies other. And you'll notice that there was a pretty big increase in the North Attleboro sewer, which is a classification under the intergovernmental. And I believe that is because of increased connections and an increased rate in the North Attleboro sewer rate. So those are the big highlights.
Tom, anything you want to add to Deb's comments? Tom, you're on mute if you're trying to speak. I'm not sure. Tom, are you still with us?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
All right, there you are.
All right. It just
You
wasn't
scared us,
connected.
guy. You scared us.
All right. Yeah, the increase in the North Attleboro sewer side was due to our rate increase last year. Whatever community has the higher rate is the rate that's paid by each community. So that was not in last year's budget, obviously, because,
Okay.
And the other part of that is there's a lot of building in areas of Attleboro that tie directly to North Attleboro. There's a large development that's being built out. And so the number of customers increased quite a bit in the North Attleboro section that we tie into.
Great. Tom, account 538053, trench repair road work. So that the trench repair is new to your department this year. Any thoughts you want to share on that with us? How that's going to look? How's that going to work?
Yeah, that was based on the estimates that we got for manholes that needed to be replaced on the paving routes for fiscal 22. And there was a cost per manhole set that we will have to pay when the contractors do the road work. So that's where that number came from, is what we're going to need to pay our portion of the manholes to be reset.
All right. Any questions from Jeremy and then Council Blair?
I just wanted to point out, thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to point out that for the second year in a row, Tom had requested $250,000 for an I&I study, 589071. That's inflow and infiltration. It's, you know, when we get extra water in the system and then we're treating groundwater and rainwater. And that's a mandate that we have to study that. So instead of funding it here, we're able to fund it through a capital project fund. So we are doing the study. So even though we cut the $250,000 here, that study is about to go ahead. And like I had said earlier about during the debt presentation yesterday, that the fund had a number of issues mature. So once we were able to put in the new debt numbers, I kind of went back and added to some things that we had cut in last year's budget, which is why you may see some differences. And we hadn't talked about the rate yet, so I just want to say this budget is being presented with no change in the wastewater rate. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Council Blair.
Hi, Tom. Good for you to be here with us tonight. I have one question. I didn't quite understand, and it's probably me, but you can probably fill me in. We used to share the cost of the electricians between water and sewer. Now you're going to take, in my understanding, you're taking responsibility for those two electricians, and you will be billing water and other departments, I assume, where these electricians work, at a rate of what was it? $60 an hour or something?
I believe the blended rate was $65 per hour.
65?
Yeah, that's correct. Though originally actually the electricians were at wastewater. Then the departments merged back in the 90s. They worked in both departments.
Yeah.
Now we're taking them back to wastewater full time, just simply because the amount of work that we have is a lot greater than what they have at the water department, and they felt that it wasn't worth the 40% they were paying for the amount of work they actually needed.
So that didn't come from you. That wasn't your idea. But anyway, 60 to 65 bucks an hour for an electrician is pretty reasonable. If you go outside to have an electrician come in. So hopefully it works out and it, both departments get what they need as far as electricians' time. And I think I see those electricians working on city streetlights and stuff, other stuff around town. Are you going to get compensated from that, for that?
Yes, we should. I mean, up to this point that we helped out where they were needed, but we should get compensated under this plan.
I would say you are an enterprise system, so. And
So-
it's a bargain at $65 an hour.
Yep.
So, Councilor Blair,
Yeah,
so I've met in the past, and it has been a while, but I have met in the past with the electricians, and there was some special projects that needed to be done throughout the city, and the time available to those electricians they didn't have time to do some of those special
Yeah.
projects. But the answer to your question is yes. Tom, if you have if one of your electricians is going outside of your department to help any department in the city, that department should be billed and paid for it. So we will have a conversation about that to make sure that's properly accounted for. And the $65 an hour is a blended rate that my office came up with some information, looked at the particular individuals that we pay, included fringe and other things, verified the rate, discussed it with Jeremy. We sort of did an analysis of that to say that this is a fair rate. So there might be days where the person actually working is not the master electrician. It might be a little bit less, but we think that it's more than a fair and reasonable rate. And included in that would be the preparation time that those gentlemen that presently hold those positions, if they're doing, work for ordering and that kind of stuff, those would be included in the billed rates. The water department, when you looked at actually the number of hours that were worked in the water department by the electrician, it came nowhere close to the 40% that was being paid from that department. So over the course of the last year, we've been looking at not only water and wastewater, but as the new indirect is implemented, and a fundamental principle of enterprise fund systems is they should be paying whatever is a known direct cost. And when that goes for between the city and that department, as well as the two departments together. So, they're not the same department, they're separate departments. I think that there might be some disagreement in the future about other shared costs that those departments think that they should be split, and I don't think should be split, but that's something that we're all working our way through. This really was, for these two particular positions, I think the best route to take. And Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, one of my concerns was, what are those individuals going to be doing for you? Like, do you have enough work for them? And you said, you have more than enough work. And through attrition, there might be other positions that don't get filled in the future because you'd have these people full-time who really work as part of your crew.
That's correct.
Okay.
I think personally, I think it's a great idea, Tom. You have more control. They work for you. As long as the other departments are paying for the work they do in those departments.
Mm-hmm.
The only other way you could have an electrical department per se of their own. And kudos for you to manage them down there. It's a nice thing to have. Somebody has to be in control, Tom, and one place is better than two.
Thank you for those words, Counselor. All right, does anyone have anything else for Superintendent Hayes? All right, Tom, thanks for joining us tonight, and have a nice evening.
Thank you. Have a nice evening. Goodbye.
Take care. All right, and to bring us home and wrap up this year's budget hearings, we have water with Courtney Wunschel coming in. Courtney, good evening. Courtney's muted.
Can you hear me?
We can. Good evening.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good.
So the way we'll do this is the way we've done it the last several years. We'll give you the opportunity to tell the council about your budget. Then we'll open it up to the city auditor and Jeremy, and then we'll open it up to questions for the council.
Okay, great.
From the council, rather. Thank you.
Okay, so I've been watching the meetings all week, and I actually just caught the tail end of Tom's. So I we can talk more about electricians if you want. But where I will start is the salary line. I really don't have much of an increase from last year to this year. And again, that is because the electricians are going back to wastewater full-time with us. I overheard the $65 per hour. For many years, we've been paying 30% and wastewater has been paying 70%. And water, I mean, in general, we get a few hours a week at best. And that's all of the time that we actually needed them. So it did make sense to place the electricians back at wastewater where there is more of a need. And we would call them to water as needed, but instead of paying 30%, pay them hourly.
Courtney, nice, good job on that and just identifying that and some nice cost savings to your department.
Thank you. The next line where you'll see a noticeable jump would be in the sewer line. And this was something else that came up looking at costs between departments. With the sewer, we've been on a permit for years with the sewer department for our sludge discharge. And what they have started to require is what they would require from other industries, because technically we are running an industry at the water department. So that increase right there reflects the surcharge that other larger industries would say for an industrial pretreatment permit. Professional services, you'll see a little bit of a drop from last year, and we had some unexpected costs come out of professional services this year. So there were a lot of transfers in. We ended up with emergency downed wires for one of the pumping stations during a storm, unexpected sprinkler repairs, unexpected analyzer repairs, upgrading of the meter reading software, that sort of thing. So there were a lot of transfers in there this year. So it's more back to a normal, what I would ask for this time of year. Another large jump you'll see up is account 530114, and that's the lab services account. And there's a couple reasons for this. Again, there's the pretreatment permit that I just mentioned. Part of that requires additional sampling of our sludge discharge. And it also includes PFAS sampling, which is a new state mandate. And we're looking at up to 6 samples a month at $200 a piece, potentially for the entire year. So that's the jump in lab services. I have a new
unfunded state mandates.
Unfunded state mandates. Yes, we all love them. The next one you'll see a jump in is 530158. That's the in-house electrical. That's actually new. And that's to cover the hourly for the electricians that I just spoke about. And that would cover a ballpark of about $290 a year. It's potentially funded slightly high, and the reasoning for that is we weren't quite sure on the blended rate at the time that I was preparing budget. But it will cover them if needed. The chemical account, which is 553130, you'll see a slight jump in that from my request from last year. When I was preparing budgets, the expected increase from most of the chemical vendors for FY22 was anywhere from 8% to 20%. A couple of these chemicals were bid and came in lower before budget was submitted. So it was actually higher when I was doing prep, but that is the reason for the jump. And the last one with a decent sized jump is lab supplies. And that is because we are budgeting replacement of a chlorine titrator and an incubator for our bacteria samples. This is equipment. I mean, this is floated around the lab for years. I actually bought the incubator when I was in the lab probably 15 years ago. So we're preparing for it to not make it. So that's the reasoning for the jump there. So those are the only ones that stick out to me. I did hear you guys mention trench repair,
Yes.
538053.
What's that
Um,
line item again?
It's 538053.
Okay, yep.
Okay, and the number that I actually used for the request for that line item was based on the last several years of council requests from DPW for paving water department trenches. So I took the last several years and took the lowest increase of those last several years. And it came to $50,000.
Okay. And can you walk us through that? Do you have folks on site who are going to be doing the actual trench repair? Is that something that'll be outsourced?
The plan is to outsource it with a member of the distribution crew, kind of overseeing and dealing with the paving contractor. We're a busy crew. So to take, a few guys off of the crew and do, for example, this fiscal year so far, we've had 56 trenches. So the sheer amount of time to do it in-house, it can't be done and keep everything else on track.
Okay. So is there a cost increase from what it's going to cost from it going from DPW to water?
We, for paving, or even if we do like crush bank or anything that we would do out in the roads, is all purchased off of the DPW bids. So we would be paying the same bid price for labor and everything for the asphalt. So it would be $160 a ton.
All right. Deb,
So I'm gonna let Jeremy speak to it more because that I know he was gonna follow up after the meeting on Monday night with Mike Tyler. But one thing I was able to share with the council the next day, because you had just done the vote for trench repairs earlier in the week, on my desk, shortly after the meeting, there were 3 purchase orders. Of those 3 purchase orders, there was one purchase order in the amount of $5,625 to do some of the trench repair. That was at the $62.50 per ton. It's not $65. And then the second one was actually for $19,200, which is subbing it out to the contractor at the $160 a ton. So the presently DPW did also sub some of that out. So if it's going to be subbed out in the water department, it's not really that much of an anomaly. My initial reaction was, wow, if we're just shifting it over there and we're going to have an additional $95 per ton cost, like, why would we do that? I mean, it's going to the ratepayer and that's a lot of money. But we are, in fact, even the taxpayer is paying for a substantial portion of this to be outsourced for the same reason Mike said that his crews, they don't have the time to do everything, particularly on larger trench jobs. So I hope that helps to clarify part of the discussion from Monday night. And then Jeremy, I didn't know if you were able to find out anything in addition to that.
Yeah, kind of the same clarifying things that you had about the larger jobs that DPW does pay the $160, and that the extra $95 that we pay is because we're getting the benefit of our laborers doing their typical job rather than being pulled to do trench work, which they're not primarily suited to do. So I got a similar explanation from DPW.
yeah, no, I agree with Deb's sentiments of, if we're just going to shift it over and then pay extra money, didn't make sense. But I think, putting it in water where the trench repair is needed makes sense. Courtney, can you talk a little bit about the rate increase?
Sure. I tried to level fund as much as possible. Again, we always do. But again, there were a couple of areas where an increase was needed. Again, some of that is, taking things from one department and putting them back to water where they belong and vice versa. The other, and I I don't have it with me, of course. I know the last couple of years, I've hit the end of the fiscal year, not so much this year yet, but the last several fiscal years, if I've needed a request, a lot of the time it's had to wait because the retained earnings aren't really as healthy as they should be. And I'm sure Jeremy can speak more to that than I can.
Yeah. So if I can, Chairman, speaking on how we got to the rate. So first of all, we're doing the same kind of blended rate that we talked about last year when we had increases in both water and wastewater, in that bills that go out in the first quarter, which is for consumption that was in fiscal 21, will be billed at the current fiscal 21 rate of $5.06. So you can see that split on the bottom of the water rate calculation page in your budget. The proposed rate for the last 3 quarters of revenue is at $5.10, which is a 4-cent increase, or a 0.79% increase. That's driven by a number of things. Like I had said yesterday during the debt presentation, the water department is doing a number of capital projects right now and took on a few $100,000 extra in debt service payments this year compared to last. You heard Courtney say that she has a $300,000 line item that went up 8 and 9%. And then adding the trench repair onto the water department, while captured in the indirect cost study, and thus the indirect costs that are owed to the general fund are lower as a result. The indirect cost is always an approximation, and now the water department's going to have to bear the direct cost and the real cost of what something costs. Sorry for saying cost 5 times. And then you also see appropriation required from retained earnings there on the water rate. You can see that 1 cent of rate generates about $15,000. So that $34,000 appropriated from retained earnings equates to about 2 cents on the rate. We tried really hard and wanted to keep any rate increase that was necessary under 1%. So we used a small appropriation from retained earnings to do so. And the way we get to $15,210 per 1 cent of rate is that we take historic cubic feet that the water department bills for and build it into a model. My predecessor, Barry Lacasse, did a number of things excellently, and the water projection is definitely one of them. We have data going back decades on what water has billed, and we can do a lot with that, and it's been very helpful. So I don't have the final couple of months of billing for FY21 when we put this budget together in April and May, but if I use the billings I do have and then use fiscal 20 to port over to approximate a projection, I'm at about 158 million cubic feet. And then this projection uses 152 million cubic feet. Historically, the budget's always been presented like this, or at least the last 4 or 5 that I've looked at, that we take a slightly reduced projection to insulate against any adverse revenue impacts in the next fiscal year, just like we do with local receipts. On the general fund, I would never want an enterprise fund to have too rosy of a projection on revenue and then be caught out and have to use retained earnings, which are either strained or not available to the extent that they do. So that's. I just wanted to give council the story behind where the $15,000 number came from for 1 cent of rate.
So, Jeremy, can you talk to what that 4 cent increase? How much will the average ratepayers bill go up?
I have that somewhere. Courtney, do you know offhand? We've had this discussion before.
The average current bill is $533 a year at the current rate.
And how much will that go up?
Bear with me.
Well, the increase was 0.79, right? So
Yeah,
not
so-
even $5
Yeah, so like $4 or so, right?
over the course of a year.
So Council Conch, I'll get to you in one quick second. So that 4 cents would generate about less than $5 of additional increase.
per ratepayer, correct?
Okay. Council Conti.
Through the chair, Jeremy, who made the decision to try to keep the rate increase under 1%?
The mayor communicated last year, and I agreed with his communication, that going years between rate increases for the water department was not sustainable, and that rather than, in FY17, we had a 4% rate increase, and then the next one was an 8.8% increase in fiscal 21. So to go those 3 fiscal years without a change made that jarring change last year a lot more painful. So the mayor and I wanted to approach yearly increases that were much more palatable to the ratepayer, and we felt a combination of 1% and then a use of retained earnings that was about 0.5% was a responsible way to go.
Thank you.
So a couple questions. There's a water ban currently, and I believe it's a state mandated water ban. What has that done to revenues and income for the water department, Courtney?
Okay, and apologies if I come in and out, I'm losing my speaker, so bear with me if I lose it. What we're seeing is not much for revenue yet because the water restrictions just started about 4 or 5 weeks ago. So we wouldn't really see it on billing yet. But what we're seeing on production is actually from productions from the plant, we were about 500,000 gallons per day higher than we were last May. And that's with the restrictions. When the state and actually other communities put on these daytime restrictions where, all that's really restricted during the day, if you look, is, watery bouncy houses, automatic sprinklers, anything you can't do by hand besides car washing, pool filling. But what you find when you put on restrictions like this, initially, at least this time of year, people do all these things early morning or at night anyway, which is fine because right now the reservoirs are in good shape. So we don't really need the restrictions. If we did, obviously, we would restrict more. But so far, we're really not seeing a difference from the plants themselves.
All right, I appreciate that. Thank you. And then this is probably more for Jeremy. Jeremy, the 135 pages of guidance from ARPA. You touched on it a couple times that it could benefit the water department. How so, from what you're seeing, and would the ratepayer be able to recognize any sort of savings from that?
Yeah, definitely happy to talk about this. So we've got somewhere around $9.6 million through ARPA funding. We have half of it that's already been collected by the city, and the other half of it is due about this time next year from the federal government. In addition, Bristol County has a large allotment, which we're in talks with county leadership about how that's going to be apportioned to constituent municipalities. So I don't even have an order of magnitude, but there will be more money coming in from Bristol County in some capacity, we anticipate. The number one priority of the administration for this ARPA money, well, maybe not the number one priority, but the largest dollar amounts being spent are going to be on water and wastewater infrastructure. To the tune, between the two of them, $4.5, maybe $5 million, depending on the speed that we can get projects up and going. We have through calendar year 23 to obligate these funds. So we don't want to rush anything. We want to be thoughtful about this, but a large portion of our funding is going to be on, as not the headline grabbing sort of projects that you would see. We're underneath the road. We're working on critical utility infrastructure. So the relief that ratepayers will see will be that these projects, these necessary and projects that we are going to do will no longer be bonded for. They will use this funding, and then that debt service will not hit the water department budget going forward, and there will not be a corresponding rate increase in future years attributable to that debt service. So the rate relief is an absence of an increase is what we'll see.
All right. So if I'm understanding what you're saying is these are going to be projects that will be able to be paid from the proceeds. When you say that there won't be future increases, you're not committing to the user rate not going up, correct?
There will not be future increases attributable to these projects that otherwise would have been seen. So if we took on $4 million worth of debt for water main replacements over 3 years and had to pay, $5 million, $5.1 million, whatever it was in debt service, whatever our cost is when we issued those, that would have to be raised on the ratepayer, by the ratepayer. And we are not going to have to do that. So we will see expenditure pressures from labor, from supply costs, from everything else that's in the budget that isn't debt. Perhaps increased contributions to OPEB that we've been at $50,000 for a few years. So there will be rate increases in some capacities in some years attributable to the whole enterprise fund, but there will be a large portion of debt that will just never show up and never touch the water budget.
So that's good. So that could realistically, even because Courtney alluded to that the reserves aren't where they as healthy as we'd like them to be. So is it reasonable to think that the ARPA funds would put us in a situation where we can build those retained earnings?
Yeah, that's the other piece of it too. And it's kind of, we don't have the ability to take ARPA funds and place them into water retained earnings, but what we do have the ability to do is, like in February, Municipal Council voted $100,000 from water retained earnings to fund a SCADA improvement project. What we would, effluent valves and various projects that are taken from retained earnings in the same way that that debt wouldn't show up on the ratepayer. These projects being taken out of retained earnings wouldn't show up either. They would be on the ARPA funds. And that's not to say we're not going to have debt attributable to the water department that's going to be on debt service. And it's not to say that we aren't going to use retained earnings for some one-time expenditures year to year. It's that the pressure on that will be lessened by the $4 to $5 million that we spend on both water and wastewater, but largely on water.
Great. Councilor Conti, I'd be really curious to get your take on this, especially as I think it's going to have an impact on you.
Well, I was concerned about the reduction in the retained earnings, and I thought that the 1% increase in the water rate was too conservative until the ARP funding came along, because that takes all the pressure off the retained earnings.
Sure.
And so I'm not concerned anymore. It's if there's a single benefit to a pandemic, this is it. The federal government stepping in to give us some money to improve our infrastructure. Jeremy, what do you think about what I just said?
I think that there is still going to be pressure on retained earnings. There are things that we fund out of retained earnings that are not going to be ARPA eligible. Vehicles, balancing the budget, some prior years, some other things. Every risk that the water department faces, any financial risk that cannot be borne by ARPA will still, the only backstop we have is retained earnings. It greatly improves our position. And I've been saying this to anyone who will listen, is that while this is a COVID recovery bill at its start, it is a stimulus bill throughout most of it. So much of it, this is transformational money for the city and for cities and towns around the Commonwealth and the country. In addition to the money that we have and the money that the county has, the state also has, I think it's $5.3 billion that right now they're trying to figure out if it's legislative directed or at the whim of the governor. So who knows how that money is going to be spent across the Commonwealth, but this is it. I just say that to say this is an economic stimulus bill, and we're grateful for the money, excited for the money, and glad to be spending it on such critical infrastructure in the city.
So, Mr. Chairman, I'm pleased that we're going to see a lot of the projects drop off of the capital improvement plan, and maybe even tackle some things that have not yet made it onto the plan because they fit into the eligibility of the funding, and we want to take advantage of that while we have that opportunity. So while next year, now I'll tell you already, I'll be concerned about what the retained earnings is going to be next year. And next year I'll be looking for maybe more aggressive than a 1% increase in the water rate. The mayor and I have talked about this once already. We'll be talking about it again tomorrow. But on the other side of it, I mean, the economists have two hands, right? So on one side we have this, one side we have that. There's a pandemic going on. There's a lot of people that are hurting, and there's a lot of and an increase in any rate, like the sewer rate, or the trash rate is going to really hurt some people. So to go light on the water rate this year is I'm okay with it because there's a pandemic going on, and employment in Massachusetts is still higher than what it was before the pandemic, and then there's other factors involved, and we all know what they are. So I'm okay with it. But next year, the retained earnings got to go back up to where they belong. And that concludes my comments.
No, I appreciate your insight. I just think that this is, Deb, I'll get you in 17 and a half seconds. Someone count down. I think that there's so many parallels between your committee and mine that I think your insight is valuable. And I agree. I think, I'd prefer not to see a rate increase, just given the times that we're in, but I think this is one that can be relatively manageable. Deb, and I see you, Peter. I'll get to you as soon as Deb's done.
That was 16 seconds. Pretty good.
I'm good, right?
I just need to make sure everybody, so obviously the ARPA money, the first 2 bullet points on the slides that come out from the federal government are water and wastewater. Third is broadband, and then there's the litany and list of other things. I just need to make sure I caution everybody as they look at, I would have echoed and said almost exactly the same comments of Jeremy that, you still have pressures against the retained earnings for all of those other things. And we need to review the CIP and make a determination of whether or not all of those capital projects that the administration wants to do actually fall under the criteria, because they have federal lists that we have to make sure that they fit into federal guidance. So there could be something that comes forward that everybody today thinks that it would come from ARPA money, but it can't come from that funding source. So that still needs to be reviewed and worked out. We're hopeful, and certainly the infrastructure is key and at the forefront of the needs for the money and the direction that the Treasury is basically saying this is really what the money is for. But I just need to bring that cautionary tale. I feel kind of like Debbie Doom and Gloom.
Nah,
So, that's
it's
it.
cool. It's what you
Don't
need.
even suggest that nickname.
Yeah.
We'll just go with Debbie Downer.
Okay.
Peter.
Hey,
Way to
thank
speak to
you.
them, sir.
I want to go back a little. Is Courtney still with us?
Yeah.
I'm still here.
Okay, Courtney, getting back to the trench repairs. What will your guys be doing when they do have a water break? Are they going to do temporary repairs to these trenches in-house?
Yes, so right now, that'll still continue. Right now, for breaks, we're cold patching and then going back and tending the trenches until they can finally be paved.
Okay.
And I think this actually has a lot of value moving it to the right department, for more departments than mine. It's going to save DPW staff a lot of time for our trenches. It's actually going to save water department staff quite a lot of time on paving trenches, because the way that DPW receives the funding to do final paving right now is basically Mike has to wait until there's a substantial amount of trenches, come down and request funding to pave. I'm going to have a line item. So basically, once I have a few out there, we'll be able to go and pave them in smaller batches. I mean, right now I have a trench list with 35 trenches. I have a couple that have been on there since November, and this is no fault of DPW. This is just the way that Mike has to go about requesting funding. Where, I have a few out there from like April, say. The end of April, I could have gone and gotten them all paved with this line item that's already there.
Okay.
That makes sense?
It makes sense to me, Courtney. The 160, is it per ton? Does that include the outside labor then? That's the install price,
Yes.
basically? Okay, that was one of my questions. And the ability to get them done faster, where you have that line item, I think that goes to the people's views, the people that drive those streets having a safe route to travel. I think it's a good idea, you know, that the responsibility be put where it belongs, and hopefully you have better control over it because it is your department, and ultimately should free up some time for the highway yard, for their highway. They're overworked like everybody else. I think it's a great idea, and I think it'll work. I really do. I think it's the right way to do this. The other thing I was going to ask, I was looking through it. You have no new hires this year, do you, Courtney?
As in new
Position?
staff or new positions? No.
Okay.
Yeah, the only difference in the salaries is again, the electricians being placed back to wastewater.
Yeah,
All
well,
of the other positions were existing.
now that you brought that up, do you think you'll have availability to get what you need on electricians on a demand type thing? I mean, when you have an electrical problem, usually it isn't something you can plan on. And do you have an outside source that you have in mind that you can call for an emergency if the wastewater can't handle?
Ideally, we should be able to get them for the time that we need. If we cannot, and I'd spoken, the blended rate actually includes overtime in there. If I need to take them, you know, say they're busy over with Tom for their 40 hours,
Yeah.
and I need them on a Saturday to get what I need done.
Well, you've addressed some of my concerns. I just know,
So that option's there. We also have a couple of other electricians that we've worked with locally. If the job happens to be, like I mentioned earlier, we had downed power lines at Luther. They're high voltage lines. So obviously that's not something our guys are going to touch. So we do have outside sources if needed.
Yeah, you basically have a maintenance electrical crew more so than construction. Am I correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you, Courtney.
Councilor Conti.
So Courtney, when you started with the water department, you were working in the lab, and the lab got disbanded because we found that we could purchase outside services more economically than conducting the testing ourselves. And now it seems like we're going back in the other direction where we're bringing more testing in-house. Has the market changed that it's favoring an in-house lab now more than in the past?
We've actually always had an in-house lab. When I first started, I started as a lab tech. It was myself and a manager. And later on, I became lab manager with the lab tech under me. When I was promoted to assistant, you know, the first thing I actually said to Christine Millhouse, this was years ago, was the lab is overstaffed. At that point with 2 people, it was overstaffed. There was not enough work for 2. So at that point, I oversaw compliance, the certifications, subbing out samples that we weren't certified to run, and did that with a lab tech. When I moved up to run the department, obviously I couldn't run both the lab and the department at the same time. So at that point, the lab tech actually left at the same time, or around the same time. So at that point, we took the lab tech position and changed it over to a lab manager. So what he actually oversees is the process testing for both plants. He does the reservoir testing and sampling. He does the sampling and the analysis and reporting for what we're certified for, which actually was certified for bacteria.
So Courtney, is she doing that in-house or is she farming it out?
He's keeping it in-house bacteria. Everything else is subbed out. And
Okay, and the new state mandates, are they bacteria?
they are not. If they were, we would be doing them in-house.
Okay, so the new state mandate is causing us to purchase more services outside.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Council Conti. Council Dolan, did you have a question?
I do. So I'm thrilled about using the ARPA funds for projects for water and wastewater. And I know that we're always concerned about retained earnings. Has anybody done any calculation on the new fee structure that we set up, that we approved, that is it going to assist us? Because I know Councilor Conti said, it's a really small ratepayer increase right now, which I think all of us want for all our ratepayers in the city. But I'd like to split the difference when it comes to anything being raised in the future, instead of going straight to the ratepayer. So I know we just passed the fee schedule. So if Courtney or Jeremy could address that, if that's going to assist, I assume it's going to assist some in the retained earnings.
Yeah, good question, Laura. I like that. Jeremy, can you address that? And also, when you're done with that, if you could just discuss the enterprise fund study, and is the findings from that recent study reflected in this budget?
Yes, definitely. Good question, Councilor Dolan. So if you look at the water rate calculation page in the enterprise fund budget, under about halfway down, you'll see that the total enterprise cost is the $7.8 million. And then below that, we take a number of offsets. And then that means we have to raise $7.7 million on the ratepayer. And the second of those offsets says estimated increase in fee revenue effective 1/1/22. So how we got there was Courtney took a historical number of types of services per year, and then multiplied it by the delta of the difference between the old rate and the new rate, and then said, all right, the increased fees should bring us in, I think it was somewhere around $90,000 over the course of the year. Some of those things are calendar dependent, and some happen earlier in the year, some happen after, some have yearly spikes where you have more connections than other connections, and they're not always, it's kind of lumpy in their occurrence. It's not always easy to project straight line out. So we rounded that down a little bit, and then said, all right, we're only going to take half a year's worth of credit for it. So here we'll see $20,000 in additional fees on top of what we already saw, and that is used to reduce the rate by about 1.1 cent, 1.3 cents. And then once we have a better sense of what these rates actually pull in, we could do a deeper analysis on it. But yes, we thought about it, and yes, we put it in here, and that reduced our either, depends how you want to look at it. If I'm the three-handed economist, right, you could either do reduce the rate, reduce retained earnings, or increase our ability to expend. And then on the indirect study, so when I arrived here in April of 2020, there was an indirect study that was due to us in January of 2020, and we still had yet to receive it. So we weren't able to put it in last year's budget. There were a number of questions that once we did receive it, that Deb's office had, that I had, we were able to correct or address those concerns in the summer and the fall, and we got a new study, and that is reflected here. So both the indirects for water and wastewater are the new study performed by the newest group. And I should have done this while I was talking, but I'm going to pull up an enterprise indirect history that I believe I've shared with some of the counselors. But the short answer, yes, it's in this one.
Can you get any information you have on that out to the council?
Yeah, definitely. So this year, water is 13.47 as an indirect rate. Water is 9.35. Those are both down from what we've used the last 4 fiscal years. Water is down about 4 percentage points, and wastewater is down about 1.3 percentage points. And by down, I mean the assessment that the general fund takes from the enterprise funds is smaller.
So
but yes, I will send that.
terms, for people watching at home, walk us through exactly what that means.
So the indirect study, it addresses services provided by city government outside of what the enterprise fund does. So Deb's office paying bills and reviewing POs, treasurer's office doing payroll and servicing debt, me putting together the budget, all the other departments and what they do to service the water department. There's a time study and a supply study. And then we take all those costs, those labor rates for all the hours, the supplies for doing that sort of stuff, and we look at what that dollar amount is as a percentage of each of the individual water and wastewater enterprise funds. And then we take that as a charge from the enterprise funds into the general fund to say, this is, as the enterprise fund, this is the benefit you're getting. You have to pay for what that benefit costs. So these studies by nature are point in time. So in the old study where water had to pay a 17% indirect rate, which means 17% of their budget net of debt service, reserve for transfer, and OPEB was used on the general fund as a revenue. That went down from 17% to 13%. And it might have been that departments like planning, when the initial study was done, the year that they looked at, there was a lot of permit review. There was a lot of involvement from the planning and development office. That doesn't happen every year. It just happened to happen the year of the study. So something I'd like to do is do the study more often, not wait 5 or 6 years to do one, to get a better, more accurate sense. And something like the trench repair, where instead of approximating it through the indirect study, we're having water pay for the actual incurred cost. So that takes the guesswork out of it. So as we can find more things like that, we'll put more things into the enterprise fund rather than in the indirect study.
Perfect. Thank you for that. That was as concise as it possibly could have been. So, all right, Courtney, thank you for coming out, spending time with us tonight. Deb, anything you want to add before we wrap up?
I do not have anything else. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Courtney.
Thank you, Courtney. And I just want to thank Jeremy, Deb, Peter, Ty, Kathleen, Laura, for spending time with us. I know it's been a long week, but I think it's been a really good week. I think we've gotten a lot accomplished. I think we've asked some really good questions, have a better insight of a tight, tough budget. From here on out, what we'll be doing, we'll be meeting Monday night at 5:30, and that's just to read the budget into the record so we can hopefully vote it on Tuesday. We have a couple public hearings on Tuesday night related to the budget that will either, I believe we have a special meeting coming up. I've got to touch base with President Cooper, but if all goes well, we should be wrapped up with the budget next week. So, all right.
Fantastic.
That'd be amazing. It'd be great.
Yeah.
And it would give
Well,
us
the other benefit, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, but the other benefit to that is that if the budget is voted earlier after the reconsideration options and all that other stuff that we have to wait in order to actually implement the stuff in the computer system, the mayor signs things, we're able to let departments get a jump on entering requisitions and actually getting into the computer system and getting some stuff done. So that's a huge benefit to the actual operation of the city. So I just, if that actually happens next week, it will be the earliest, I think, in the 26 years that I've been here, and I'll be absolutely delighted.
There you go. Yeah, it came down a little earlier than it has in the last couple of years, which is great. We have 45 days from the 11th, which put us right at about May 11th, which put us right at about, I think, June 25th was the absolute last day. It's cutting it too close. So that's why I really do appreciate Rick and Todd really making the sacrifices away from your family after a full day of work to make sure that we get this situated, taken care of, so we can get it passed in a reasonable time. So that being said, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned at 7:43. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.
Thanks, Jay. See you, everyone.
Weekend.
Right.